Welcome all on the December edition of the Proximus Next Cyber Life series. We trust all of you are familiar by now with the NIS2 legislation, which entered already more than a year now ago in force, and how also that impacts your business. So that may be directly, or it might also be indirect. For example, if you are a supplier of a company who is subject to NIS2. So my name is Bart Callens. I'm Product Manager Cybersecurity at Proximus Next, and together with my colleague, David Kommers, Cybersecurity Architect, we will demonstrate today how you can turn these two and similar compliance challenges into a real business advantage for your company. So how we will do it, we will follow CISO through a typical workday of him, and we will show how GRC as a service may support the CISO with his daily security challenges. So stay tuned. It will not be only slideware, but my colleague David will also give a very practical demo of the Proximus Next GRC as a service solution. So let's start. Let's meet Chris. Chris is our CISO. And so we will follow him during his day at work. So Chris may be a CISO, he may be called an ISO, Information Security Officer, a Chief Security Officer, or even just a security officer. As myself, I started my career 27 years ago as a security officer. So this CISO, he may be a dedicated person in your organization. He may combine his role with other roles as a DPO or a more operational role, especially in smaller organizations. But let's go back to our CISO, Chris. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. Chris maybe is still having his breakfast. He already gets a ping from his legal department. So let's say it's Lane, who was on a conference or who read about some new legislations lately. And those legislations are also touching security aspects. So Lane contacts Chris. Can you make sure we're compliant with this new legislation? Chris, of course, is say yes. He's a good CISO. I will make sure I will deep dive in this new legislation. I will look to standards and I will do an assessment, and I will make sure that we will get ready and compliant in due time. So what does our friend Chris do now in practice? What does he do in practice? He will look up, obviously, information. He will, for example, draw a kind of a compliancy timeline. As you all may be familiar with, the NIS2 directive entered into force 2-3 years ago. Last year, it was also transposed in the national law in Belgium. There is a list established of all essential important entities and essential entities. And now companies should really start to work. So there is a first temporary or first intermediate timeline of April 26, where companies they should go and make sure that they are compliant at least with the basic or important assurance level of the cyber fundamental framework, or when they chosen for the ISO route, that they have their statement of applicability for ISO. So Chris should at least start to work, for example, if his company is considered as an essential company, to already go for a basic or an important compliancy. And next timeline or the next touch point will be April 27, when the final assurance level needs to be obtained for the company. And then, of course, it doesn't stop NIS2. Europe already foresaw that in April 27, there will be also, or end of 27, there will also be a review of the NIS2 regulation. So what does Chris now do? He go to the website of the CCB. There is a lot of good information, what he can find over there. Nice Excel files such as this one. Basically, what is this Excel file? It's including all the requirements for basic, important, or essential level where companies need to adhere to when going for NIS2 compliancy. It's a very nice Excel. It also includes formulas and so on, because for being compliant, companies, they must obtain certain maturity levels on all of those hundreds of requirements. So what does our friend Chris do? He copies obviously the relevant tabs of this Excel file. He creates his own Excel file for compliancy. In this case, basic and essential, because he wants to obtain the basic level by April 26, and then later on the essential level by April 27. So Chris now is happy. He has his Excel. He can start doing his assessments, scoring maturity level, and so on. Now, what if Chris would be a CISO and he would be responsible for different legal entities in a group or in a holding across Europe? Well, it complexifies things, because NIS2, it's a directive, it's not an act, meaning that all countries in Europe, they are transposing the NIS2 legislation at their own pace and with their own specialties or own special implementations. And even worse, you see here, after more than the deadline, because Europe said by October 24, the NIS2 directive should have been implemented everywhere. 1 year later, half of the European countries didn't yet implement or transpose the NIS2 directive into European legislation. So we all know in Belgium, we have the route with the cyber fundamentals as a standard, or with the ISO 27000 as a framework to obtain these two compliances. All those other countries in Europe, they may have different standards that they will impose in their legislation. So just as an example, Cyprus, they are talking about NIST 853. Ireland, for example, they are using the NIST CSF 2.0 framework, and also other countries such as Belgium, but also Romania or Lithuania, they have their own flavor, or they made their own flavor. They made their own standards out of existing standards. So very recently also, last week, Germany, well, it's a very big country, but they were also late in transposing this directive. And they also have their special flavor of it. So they're not talking about essential entities, for example, they're talking about particular important entities. And they're also imposing some specific requirements about so-called critical components. So in short, if you are a CISO of a group of companies active all over Europe, you should take into account standards which are imposed by all those countries. So obviously, Chris, he goes back to his Excel sheet. He say, for example, I have also an entity in Ireland. I add the tab Ireland, and there they have the NIST CSF 2.0 framework. He puts all the requirements over there. Cyprus, for example, they have this other NIST standards and so on. So it becomes really a big Excel file. And obviously, we have talked now about NIS2, but there are other European legislations which are applicable depending obviously of your sector you're active in. So you have the AI Act, which is also imposing some security requirements. You have the CRA Act, which is aiming more, or is targeting manufacturers of hardware or software suppliers, and there are also strict requirements when it comes to cybersecurity in the design of those software and hardware. We have DORA, which even goes a step further than NIS2 and is imposing additional requirements for the finance industry. We have EHDS, which is the European Health Data Space Act, which is also talking about additional security and privacy requirements in the health sector. So again, depending of the sector you're active in, you should obviously also take all that other compliances into account. So obviously, Chris goes back to the Excel sheet and adds some additional tabs to take that into account. And if all of that is not yet enough, the standards itself, obviously, they're also evolving. Most of you may know that recently the CCB, they released their new version, the version 2025 of the Cyber Fundamentals Framework, which is basically adding additional complexity because the Excel file now contains different tabs per NIST function, as you see over here. So again, this evolution, which is a very good evolution because it takes into account, for example, the new NIST framework, additional supply chain and OT security requirements, but it includes some additional complexity. So it's 10 o'clock. So now we only had the legal person, but obviously the CISO, he also interacts with other persons in the organization. For example, there may be Steven. Steven is a sales guy. He has a new RFP he needs to answer. And in this new RFP, the customer, he adds an Excel file, a checklist with all kinds of compliancy requirements. CISO, again, he will say, yes, for sure, send it to me. I will answer to it. What the CISO needs to do. The questionnaire of the customer could look like this. Again, different tabs linked to different compliances. And again, the customer will go tab per tab and he will answer one by one all the requirements over there. So huge work. 12 o'clock, so it's noon, but there is Peter, the guy from procurement, coming to Chris. He says, we want to, procurement, they want to onboard a new supplier, but obviously, is it safe to do business with them? Also, in the light of different regulations, such as NIS2 and other ones, supply chain management becomes more and more important. So the CISO also needs now to work for the procurement department, and he will check with the new supplier. Again, he may send now, instead of having to respond to that kind of Excel, he may now send this kind of Excel to suppliers and mailing forth and back and so on to make sure that the supplier is also vetted from a security point of view as a new supplier. 2 o'clock, there's an audit going on. Arne, the auditor, comes to Chris. There's an ISO 27000 audit, for example. Show me all kinds of evidences that this that ISO is imposing. It could be, for example, proving that employees, they followed the mandatory security trainings. Maybe it's about proving that critical personnel, they have NDAs in the HR, proving that the vulnerability management process is working fine, and so on. Basically, Chris, he will run around the company and he will contact all departments to get all those evidences for the auditor. So 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, Chris, it's the end of the year, so he may need to defend his budget for the next year. He goes to the CFO. I say, can I get some additional budget for next year? But yes, for sure. But why do you ask the double of this year? Well, CISO, yeah, we need to better protect our IT environment because there are more threats. But basically, at this stage, without GRC as a service, CISO doesn't have any additional proofs or support to towards the CFO to defend his budget for the next year. And if all of that is not yet enough, Chris goes at home, but guess what? His company gets hacked. The CEO may call him. He may say, Chris, we spent a lot of money on all those compliance tracks last year. How is it possible that we are still breached? Again, the CISO, without the GRC as a service platform, which we'll see later on, he may have it very difficult to explain to a CEO why they spent all that money, but at the end, they are still hacked. So a lot of challenges for our CISO. It's also not a surprise, obviously, that a lot of CISOs, they are having a burnout those days. In case of attacks also, if they're not having a burnout, the CEO may just decide to that the CISO gets fired. So those days, being a CISO, it's let's say it's a hard thing to do. But what if? So again, we have the different personas we saw earlier on. So what if the CISO, he would have ready to use and up-to-date data, and up-to-date data for supporting all his compliance assessments. So a portal where he can have in one place all the requirements, whether it's for ISO, whether it's for NIS2, for DORA or other ones, and they're also kept up to date. So that would already be a great thing as a starter. If you could just refer the sales or the customers in general to a portal where they can look up all kinds of compliances of the company without that the CISO will need to fill in all kinds of Excel sheets of those customers. From a supplier side, what if the CISO would have a platform to ease this process, this communication with potential suppliers for vetting the security of them? What if, again, he would be able to automate the gathering of evidences for his auditor, for his CFO? What if he would have nice compliance and risk dashboards, actually supporting him in requesting the necessary security budgets, and also obviously proving to his CEO that, or let's say being proactive, and by having all those information, he could mitigate the risk of being hacked. So obviously, I guess it will be a lot better for the CISO. He could sleep a bit longer, or at least he would not have any nightmares anymore about all the things he still needs to do. And also, obviously, so the legal department will be ready because they will be ensured that the company will be compliant in time, and everybody will be happy. So I'm getting a bit over my time. I will hand over now the words to David, who will now go more into detail about who the GRC as a service offering could, in practice, help a CISO in his security program. David.
Okay, also from my side, welcome everybody. So let me start first with the, I would say a CISO burning question is, okay, can you manage indeed your governance, risk and compliance? As we know, and also from when we look at all the compliance frameworks, most of those frameworks are risk driven. So one big part of our security program is focusing actually on risk management, risk strategy. And from a compliance perspective, we need to be ready to demonstrate our compliance, and we need to be able to withstand audits. So when we see in reality, when we are preparing an audit, there is also or always a lot of manual preparation work to be done. So how could it be, or what would it be better if we could eventually have this information already available in some kind of platform where we have some automation available. So you see also that governance, risk and compliance is very essential, but at the same time, it's also quite complex. So why did we develop GRC as a service? As mentioned before, yeah, as we know, security resources are scarce. It's difficult to find the right people for the job. So we want to provide an answer to that. On the other hand, when we look at compliance requirements for most companies, there are a lot of security legislation that hits, let's say, a company, and all this additional work comes on top of, I would say, the usual business activities that the company has to perform. So also there, we need to have some more efficiency, let's say, in managing our security and compliance programs. Yeah. And last but not least, security. We all know security is touching a lot of elements within an organization. It becomes very complex to manage, let's say, security. It's not only the technical part of security, I would say, that comes into play, but it's nowadays in combination with compliance and governance, a very daunting task for a security officer to manage this. Okay. So what do we want to achieve, in fact, with our GRC as a service? First of all, we want to improve, of course, our security posture. We want to avoid that we are working, let's say, towards a good security program, implementing the necessary security controls, putting all the policies in place, and then discover once we have done this, and we need actually to maintain our security posture, that it becomes very difficult because I would say the buzz of consultants that we hired initially to set up our security program has gone, and all the work that needs to be done in the run phase comes on top of already the busy schedule that employees within a company have already. So there is a real important task. How can we maintain security posture, and how can we do this in a cost-efficient way? Yeah. So this is really the focus of our GRC as a service outcome. When we look at what Bart was showing earlier, when we look at people from legal, for instance, what do they want? Okay, and maybe also the security officer, they are looking for a security assessment, asking the question, where do we stand today? And what do we need to do to raise our security level? And how can we plan, let's say, the necessary budgets for the coming years? So that's why we need to create a roadmap. From a compliance perspective, there are a lot of regulations that hit us for the moment. So it would be interesting to have something at hand where we have already a lot of security frameworks available. Yeah. And on the last part is, okay, GDPR is still in force. How can we manage, in fact, these GDPR requirements? When we look at sales, okay, they want to provide their customers, for instance, information about an ISMS or an ISO certificate of their company to prove their security. Okay, how can we allow customers to safely download this and publish this without everybody just being able to grab this information? Or when we need to answer RFPs, then we are able also to have this information, as Bart mentioned before, at hand. Think about NIS2. One big chunk of requirements is coming from supplier management. How can we, for instance, be able to vet our suppliers that they are adhering to the security regulations that our company imposes? Auditors, they always need a lot of proof or evidences, let's say. How can we make sure that we can provide this information in a cost-efficient manner? Yeah. One of the things that we notice when we are talking to customers is, yes, we do assessments, we do an evaluation of our control maturity. But what we lack, in fact, is, okay, when we do an implementation of a control, how do we know whether it's really effective? That is one of the strong points, I think, that the GRC platform can offer us, which I will also demonstrate in the demo. Another point that I want to raise is, okay, we want to have much more visibility, let's say, in our security program. What is going well? What is going maybe a bit less? Where do we need to improve? Do we have a clear idea on what the biggest risks are? How well are they under control? This is type of information that we would like to visualize more in dashboards so that we can present this to our board level, for instance. And then, of course, the CISO, he is dealing or she is dealing with risk management, needs to handle policies and implement controls or monitor those controls. Maybe we need some integration with ITSM tooling so that our engineers can execute specific tasks. Yeah. So when we look more in detail in the GRC as a service, and also what I will demonstrate in the GRC platform, is in fact, we are always starting from the frameworks, the security frameworks, for instance, in this case, NIS2 Siphon, which tells us, in fact, okay, what do we need to be compliant with? What do we need to adhere to? Which security controls are really important? Think about the key measures and how can we assess those quite quickly. That is the basis for our security program. Then we do an assessment, and in the best case, we are doing an assessment every year to monitor our progress of our security, hopefully improvements. But this is a snapshot, let's say. It's a review on paper. What if we could really automate our security controls and really measure the effectiveness of our implemented controls? And this is something that is the basis to drive also our risk management. Those validations of those control effectiveness will be also the basis to look into our compliance reporting. How well are we doing against the NIS framework? How well are we doing against ISO 27001, for instance? And at the same time, those controls will also contribute to our risk management. And so answering the question, how well are we doing on our critical risks, is also an important topic. So what I was explaining with that automation is we do the assessments. We have a view on our, I would say, maturity on paper. And we ask ourselves the question, okay, but can we do a reality check to verify, okay, how well our security controls effective? Do they align with our assessment that we do, for instance, yearly? And if not, can we evaluate, and can we also automatically take action to improve that effectiveness of those controls, or maybe implement other controls that will raise our security? And associated to that outcome will be a risk evaluation, eventually also a risk creation that needs to be managed by the CISO. Those risks, of course, they can be reviewed and made visible through dashboarding, for instance. We will look into tactical risks, for instance, unmitigated critical vulnerabilities. Can we detect them? How do we need to manage those? And from a strategic point of view, okay, when we see that, for instance, vulnerability management is lacking effectiveness, okay, then we maybe need to drive strategic programs to really improve our security posture and improve risk-based vulnerability management. And I think we are now at the end of the presentation, and I will prepare myself on another PC just to start the demo. So the CISO says, okay, let's start with an assessment. We need to assess our NIS2 compliance. Okay, let's have a look what our GRC platform can do for us to help us speed up that assessment. And I will take an example here of a company that is NIS2 essential. So when we create an NIS2 assessment, we will get an overview of all the security controls that we need to adhere to, exactly based on what the Excel of CCP, for instance, for essential companies will look like. I'm going to show you that here in an example. So what we have is we get all the control statements, yes, for all the categories, and we can evaluate them on 4 different criteria. We are going to evaluate the existence of policies. We are going to look into the realization, I would say the implementation of a policy. This is in line with what CCB has defined in their CCB Siphon Excel. But we have added, let's say, 2 more criteria, which is the level of automation and the level of reporting. Behind the scenes in the tool, in the platform, we have configured we did the mapping between those evaluation criteria so that they are in line with what CCB has as an outcome using their Siphon Excel assessment tool. What else did we change also? We are not evaluating, let's say, the control statements on the CMM scale. Well, we are, but we are doing that behind the scenes. We have mapped, let's say, those CMM levels to what I would say plain language, that everybody understands, okay, what level of policies do I have? If I don't have any policy, then it's clear. But if you have, for instance, only a partial policy, how do you know exactly, okay, which maturity level that will correspond to? That is actually being mapped in the tool. And all these configurations can be changed by the security officer if needed. Yeah. So we are evaluating the policies, we are evaluating the implementation. As you can see, we are also evaluating the level of automation, and we are also evaluating the level of reporting. Based on the selection that we made here, there will be an evaluation score on the level from 1 to 5, yes. And we take, in this case, the lowest maturity, yeah. We also have an average calculation on the scoring on the four evaluation criteria. So you do that, in fact, for all the security controls that are stated in the NIS2 Siphon Excel. Yeah. Once you have done this, you of course you can get an overview of all your scoring. Where you have here, you see per category, you see the average that has been calculated. And here is the lowest maturity level, as I explained. So here you can see, okay, where do we get these two? This comes from, we have an implementation done on most systems. Yeah. So that's where we get those 3. In this case, we have a 2 for control statement 1.4 because we just did an implementation on some systems. And so we do that for everything. You can also indicate elements that are not in scope. Yeah. Then you have some graphs available that provide you more insights in, okay, what maturity level did I reach? A heat map with all the levels of maturity and the level of controls that are there to that level. An overview of the maturity per building block and also an average maturity. You see here, for example, we have an asset, the building block asset management or the category asset management. We have an 1 out of on a scale 1 out of 5, I would say. Yeah. So we can see immediately the gap that we need to have. For instance, if we need to reach a 3, you see here the gap that actually is representing asset management. Yeah. You also see, for instance, that mitigation, when we need to respond to incidents, is scoring very well. Yeah. So based on that information, we get other graphs that provide us more insights in what do we need to do. Yeah. Again, this is a snapshot. We are evaluating our controls based on, I would say, based on what people tell us. Yeah. Now the question is, okay, what priorities do we need to take to increase our maturity level or to move on with our security program? Therefore, in the platform, we have what I would call a priority calculation module, which will take into account the gap that we have between the as-is and the to-be. We are taking into account the type of controls, whether it's a prerequisite, whether it's an administrative control, preventive or corrective. And you have also the possibility to judge the effort that is needed to go from the as-is to the to-be. And then a priority is calculated, and that priority can eventually be changed by the user, yeah, to say, okay, in my business context, I have other priorities. Yeah. So that is in fact what the assessment concerns. Now, I was talking also in my presentation about standards. Yes, we have 200 standards available, let's say, in the platform. Yeah, and depending on the regulation that your company needs to adhere to, you can select one or more frameworks. So in my case, what I did, I used Siphon control important, for instance, and I need also to be compliant with ISO 27000 and one. I find it here. Sorry. ISO 27001 version 2022, for instance. So I selected those. So later on, I will show you that how I can use those frameworks into my security program. Yeah. Now, the next thing that we need to look at is, okay, I need to do risk management, of course. Risk management consists of evaluating risks. And to be able to evaluate risks, what we need to do first is we need to have or create, let's say, a risk register. And I guess most companies will have already a risk register. So we need to enter that into the platform. And before we are able to, I would say, calculate the risk scores, we need to have a risk matrix. Yeah. So in the platform, you can customize your own risk matrix where you are going to evaluate the different impact levels, the different likelihood levels, and you are going to provide a risk score to each of these combinations. And that will be used later on to evaluate the risks. Important to know, maybe you always have per risk register one risk matrix. So imagine that for OT, you are using a different risk matrix than for ICT, then you will have two risk registers, each with their own risk matrix. Okay. So when we look into the risk management itself, we take the risk register. Sorry, I need to go to risk management. I have a risk register here. And I have here a list of risks that I used for my demo purposes. When we normally talk with customers, we also can provide a list of standard risks, I would say, that the customer can use just to evaluate their risk and link security controls that they have implemented in there. Yeah. So I will show you just some information of risks. So you will be able to document your risks. You can put complete text in there. You can evaluate the risk rating based on the impact and the likelihood, based on the risk matrix that I showed you before. Eventually, if you put controls in there, which I come later to, you have here a list of controls that you have defined in the platform. You can link them to the risk. Yeah. That will, of course, impact your residual impact and likelihood rating. So you can also link that. And what is also interesting, you can create what I would say custom fields, which is what I would call metadata that can enrich your data in general in the platform. Now I'm showing you this for risk. It's customized data. I will show you that later, but you can do that for any item in the platform. Yes. Okay. Once we have documented our risks, okay, we also need to have a look at those custom fields that I was referring to, and also later on those policies. So here, for instance, when I go to the risk, maybe you saw it earlier, when I want to define a status or I want to define an owner and assign them to the risk, okay, I can define this as a custom field where I can say, is this a mandatory field and what data type should it be? And I can select from a rich text, a number, a date, or a multiple choice field. Yeah. So I can add that automatically to the risks in this case. Now, let's focus on the controls and the policies that we would like to put in place. Yeah. And you see here, I have a lot of policies in place. I would say security teams that I want to use for my security program. Let's take the example of risk-based vulnerability management. Yeah, for risk-based vulnerability management, what I can do, I can include policies, my documents, I can put them in here. I can put security controls in there that I want to evaluate. I'll show you that later when I talk about automation. But let's take an example of, let's say, the control patches and security updates. They need to be reviewed and to determine the priority to be applied. So when I go into more detail, and this is something that you can create yourself, or you can create, let's say, the siphon control statements from CCB and put them in there one-to-one and map them with the cybersecurity controls of, I take the example, siphon or even ISO 27001. Yeah. So here automatically you can define the level of maturity. Yeah. And on the same time, you can define the mapping with, for instance, the siphon controls, because I choose that standard to show you earlier how this maps to my siphon controls. Yeah. This way, I will also be able to demonstrate my compliance. Yes. So let me show you quickly the compliance overview. Yeah. When I show you the compliance, you see here all the standards and the frameworks that I wanted to use for my compliance, from my compliance perspective. Yeah. So let's go to the siphon important clauses. What you notice is I have only implemented apparently 25 control statements. Yeah. How come? Well, if I go to my dashboard, I see that I have a lot of non-implemented clauses. You see here all those which are not implemented. And if I want to, I can link them to the controls that I defined in my security program. If they are not mapped to any control, I have not implemented them, so they will remain as such. Yeah, and they are visible in here. I did some mapping on supply chain management, and you see here the controls that I created and to which control in siphon they are actually mapped to. Yeah. So this way I can really follow up the compliance level, let's say. Yeah. Okay, that was in a nutshell what I wanted to show you here about the security information that we can actually get out of it. Now let me show you quickly something about dashboarding. And therefore I want you to show you here, I go again to my risk-based vulnerability management. And I explain to you, okay, I've implemented some controls about, for instance, my patch management. Yeah. So let's think about, okay, how effective is my patch management for the time being? Yeah. And therefore, I have created two controls, two statements that I want to use to evaluate my control implementation. And therefore, what I did is I did an implementation with my platform with Microsoft Defender for vulnerability management. And I'm checking, for instance, the coverage of critical open vulnerabilities that are not mitigated, that are still open and that are applicable for my assets. You can imagine if I have a high coverage of critical vulnerabilities that are not remediated, at that time, maybe there is a problem with my risk-based vulnerability management. And how do I do this implementation? I can do it through low code. Yes, I can just create some workflows here. And in this case, I created an API call to Microsoft Defender based on the Graph API. And I did some advanced query hunting to fetch the necessary data that I will use later on in my dashboards. Yeah. So therefore, okay, when these have run, I will quickly show you what I have created. So when I look at my control that I showed you in the platform, patches and security updates for assets are reviewed to determine the priority to be applied. When I did my assessment, I gave it a score of maturity level 4. Yeah. Now, the effectiveness of my control, I did an implementation, I did an automation, and this is the automation that was linked to that. Now, running that automation provides me with a lot of data, and that is the coverage of the criticals that evolves during the time, and you see clearly that my coverage of critical vulnerabilities is less. So I have more and more unpatched critical vulnerabilities. And that type of information in combination with my maturity assessment scoring that I did here clearly indicates that I have a discrepancy between what I have assessed and what I evaluate real time. Yeah. And based on that information, we can actually start working and evaluating, first of all, are my controls that I implemented concerning patch management, are they effective? Apparently not. Yeah. What do I need to do next? I need to evaluate my control. Why is it not effective? And if it's really not effective, I need to do something about it. And maybe I need to raise a risk about my risk-based vulnerability management. These are the elements that you can really get out of the dashboarding using all the data that exist in that platform. And that's a bit in a nutshell what I wanted to demonstrate with this demo. Thank you very much.
Proximus Next. Inspired by tech, driven by people.